It's dawn on the morning of July 19th, 2011. Local police knock on the door of Jose Oliveira, searching for his lover Michaela. Bleary-eyed, she comes to the door, where police deliver the worst news she could have imagined. Her ex-husband Xavier was supposed to be driving back from a camping trip with their 2 young sons, but the police inform her that Xavier has ended himself at a motorway rest stop over 200 miles away. However, all was not as it seemed. Xavier Baligant, a 29-year-old Belgian laboratory technician, was returning home from a family vacation in the Ardèche region of France. He'd spent a week at a campground in Joyeuse with his parents and his 2 sons, Dylan and Jordan, aged 4 and 7. It was a trip the family made almost every summer, a simple, happy tradition. On the evening of July 18th, Xavier set off on the long drive back to Belgium. He chose to travel at night to avoid the heavy summer traffic. Even at this quiet time, the journey to his home in Nivelles would take nearly 10 hours. His plan was straightforward: drive through the night and drop his sons off to his ex-wife Michaela the following morning. Xavier and Michaela had been divorced for several years, but they had remained on great terms with each other. They'd met when they were young, had 2 children together, and maintained a close relationship for the sake of the kids, who they both loved dearly with all their hearts. So when police delivered the devastating news that Xavier had taken his own life on the way home from camping, Michaela was stunned. She didn't believe it for a second. Nothing about Xavier's recent behaviour suggested he was capable of such a thing. Furthermore, he'd recently sent a text message to his best friend Laurent, asking if he wanted to have a barbecue together after Xavier got back. These weren't the actions of someone planning to end their life within hours. Still in shock and denial, Michaela gathered her things and prepared to drive to France to collect her children. Thankfully, Dylan and Jordan had been found safe in their father's car, half asleep in the back seat. But this detail only raised more questions in her mind. Xavier adored his sons. Even if he'd been thinking of ending himself, he would never have done something so traumatic in their presence. And why would he abandon them alone at night at a highway rest area in the middle of nowhere? When Michaela finally arrived in France, it seems there had been some kind of miscommunication between the French and Belgian authorities, or some other kind of Chinese whispers type mix-up along the way. Xavier hadn't ended himself at all. While stopping off at the Malvo rest area, somebody had shot him multiple times, finishing off the job execution style. So what actually happened that night? At around 2 a.m, a highway services patroller was working nearby, directly across the motorway from the Malvo rest area. In the quiet of the night, he heard banging noises that resembled gunshots. Using a service road, he crossed to the other side of the motorway, reaching the rest area within 5 minutes. As he approached an area that contained a block of restrooms, the only well-lit area on the site, everything seemed calm. But then his eyes locked onto a man lying motionless on the ground, in a pool of blood, near the entrance to the women's toilets. It was immediately obvious that he was beyond any help. Police arrived at 2:45 a.m. and were able to identify the victim from his identity papers. Xavier Baligant, a Belgian tourist from Pontes-Celles. He'd sustained bullet wounds to each of his hands, one to the abdomen, and one to the head. It was theorized that perhaps the hand injuries were sustained by a defensive maneuver if Xavier had reflexively thrown his hands up. I personally thought it was a bit odd that each hand was perfectly shot, and wondered if the perpetrator might have placed the shots purposefully to briefly extend his victim's suffering. An unpleasant thought for sure, but well within the capabilities of a cold-blooded killer. Whatever the case may be, the autopsy revealed a chilling detail. The final finishing shot had been at point-blank range, fired at the base of the neck, following an upward trajectory from front to back, with the bullet exiting through the top of the skull. Clearly the assailant really wanted to make sure he was dead. After careful analysis, ballistic experts made a surprising discovery. The killer had used 7.5mm bullets fired from a carabiner model 1931, the standard issue rifle of the Swiss Armed Forces between 1933 and 1958. Although not particularly rare, this was an old collector's item. This weapon was far from ideal for a quick, discreet murder. It weighs 8.8 pounds or 4 kilos empty, and measures 43.5 inches, well over a metre long. It's a noisy, comparatively slow repeating rifle with a straight pull bolt action. After each shot, the shooter has to manually pull the bolt back to eject the spent casing, then push it forward to chamber the next round. It requires physical effort between each shot, unlike an automatic or semi-automatic weapon. The choice of weapon was bizarre. This wasn't a gun you'd choose for a quick hit in a public place. Yet that's exactly what happened. This was an execution, carried out in the only well-lit area of a motorway rest stop, a public location where people could be present at any hour. In fact, there were 24 trucks parked there that night, with drivers sleeping inside. The investigators interviewed all the truck drivers present that night. These drivers were from all over Europe, including French, Italian, German, Spanish, Polish, Romanian and Russian drivers. Interpreters had been called in to help collect testimonies urgently, as the investigators knew that once foreign drivers crossed the border, tracking them down again would be an incredibly difficult task. One testimony stood out, that of Jean-Noël Forest, a French driver whose truck wasn't parked with the other 23 vehicles. Jean-Noël explained that he'd arrived around 8:30 or 9 p.m. for his mandatory rest break. The truck parking area was full, so he'd parked at the end of the car parking area instead, where there were no other vehicles. He'd fallen asleep around 10 p.m, but was jolted awake sometime between 2 and 2:30 a.m. by gunshots. Alarmed, Jean-Noël quickly left his bunk and moved to the driver's seat so he could look in his mirrors. He stayed in the cabin, silent. He watched the parking lot exit in his mirror. He said he didn't see any cars leaving while he was watching, and after waiting for quite some time without seeing any movement, he eventually went back to sleep. But here's what troubled investigators. Of the 24 truck drivers questioned, only 4 claimed to have heard gunshots. Not only did few drivers claim to hear anything, but not one of them saw anything either. And perhaps most shocking of all, not a single one of them thought to call the police. While it could be true that some were heavy sleepers, it's been suggested that more likely the drivers didn't want to get involved in business that didn't concern them, either out of fear of retribution from the criminals responsible, or simply the fact that time is money for long-distance truck drivers. Perhaps they could not afford to be held up and entangled in the investigation. The investigators checked footage from the dome camera installed at the Malvo rest area. Unfortunately, the camera happened to be pointed the wrong way. And even if it had been pointing the right way, it was so far away and the lighting was so poor, it still wouldn't have been any help. The killer had left remarkably few clues. It's as if he'd come specifically to kill Xavier, and then disappeared just as quickly. As for the motive for Xavier's killing, there were several theories. Robbery was quickly ruled out since nothing was taken. Some wondered if Xavier had witnessed something he wasn't supposed to see. Drug or weapon trafficking or some other kind of illegal activity. It seemed unlikely. The carabiner model 1931 wasn't the kind of weapon criminals would typically use, and trying to eliminate a witness with a rifle whose noise would attract even more attention didn't make logical sense. Conspiracy theorists would be quick to link Xavier's death to his job as a lab technician for a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical giant. As intriguing as that might sound, there doesn't seem to be any evidence for this. Furthermore, if someone from the company or a rival company or whoever wanted him eliminated for some reason, it seems pretty unlikely that a professional hitman would use such an outdated and loud piece of equipment in a well-lit public area full of potential witnesses to complete the task. Investigators obviously looked into Xavier's personal life. Apparently, at the time of his death, his ex-wife Michaela was seriously considering leaving her current partner, Jose Oliveira, to get back together with Xavier. Jose was certainly a prime suspect. He didn't have the best reputation in Nivelle. Allegedly, he was known for having had some run-ins with the law due to his temper and occasionally questionable methods, including threats and even physical assaults. Could jealousy have driven Jose to kill Xavier? The problem is, the distances involved and the timing of the killing versus the timing of the Belgian police turning up at Jose's place looking for Michaela make it a physical impossibility. Others speculated that perhaps Jose had paid someone to carry out the hit on Xavier. This line of thought was followed by investigators, but there was no evidence found to support the theory. Checking back through the various cameras and crossings Xavier drove through on the way, police determined that nobody had followed him. Also, how would this potential assassin know that Xavier would take a break at that specific rest stop if the killer was waiting to ambush him? Ultimately, the investigation found no evidence that Jose had any involvement in the murder, and despite the pending reconciliation between Xavier and Michaela, Jose claimed he'd understood and even accepted it. In fact, he said he had no resentment towards Xavier at all. Soon after the murder, Dylan and Jordan had been interviewed. They were calm, as they hadn't yet been told their father was dead. Although they didn't witness the awful act, they were able to tell investigators that during the trip, Xavier had stopped 3 times, once at a gas station, once at another rest area they couldn't name, and finally at Malvo. They also revealed an extra, possibly very important detail. One of the brothers said that during the journey, Xavier had received a text message. Unfortunately, investigators were never able to view or trace this message, and it's not entirely clear to me why this was. It's claimed in the press that the expert who examined Xavier's phone at the time couldn't get the phone to turn on or it wouldn't restart. Perhaps it was damaged in the attack, but it's not obvious what the problem was. I would have thought that the right expert could have easily extracted the vital information, or that it would be traceable through the network provider, but it seems not. So important is this piece of information to the case that as recently as July 2020, the family's lawyer has been pushing for a re-examination of Xavier's phone. But there doesn't seem to be any more updates about this elusive message to date. Who sent that message? Could it explain why Xavier stopped at the Malvo rest area that night? These questions remain frustratingly unanswered. The year after Xavier's death, another horrific case made headlines: the Chevaline killings. This was a case where a British family were massacred in the south of France. It's a whole other episode on its own, but it's worth mentioning here because of the similarities the police noticed between both incidents. Both cases involved tourists visiting France, executed in public places. Both involved children who were spared. Both involved an organised, precise killer. And most notably, both involved Swiss Army collector's weapons. A Carabiner 1931 killed Xavier Baligant, while a Luger P06 pistol was used in the Chevaline murders. The similarities are striking, and both cases remain unsolved to this day. Prosecutors in charge of the investigations remain reserved about any potential link, saying the connection is tenuous at best, and no formal link has been established. Is it the same killer, or different killers with similar profiles? The mystery endures, and both possibilities are equally chilling. Xavier Baligant stopped at a rest area for what should have perhaps been nothing but a brief bathroom break. Instead, someone executed him with a vintage Swiss rifle while his two young sons slept just meters away. The killer vanished into the night, leaving nothing behind but unanswered questions and a family destroyed by grief. Almost 15 years later, no one has been charged with Xavier Baligant's murder. The investigation continues, but justice for Xavier and his family remains elusive.